We are igniting the blockchain. This is Elizabeth, otherwise known as the Cryptowoman, and today I am here with you, with Jess Allen and Graham Boyd. Those of you who know me might know Jess. She's a Renaissance woman and has been active in the crypto field now for a few years, and she has introduced me to Graham Boyd due to an interest in a concept called sociocracy. Just started talking to me about this a few weeks ago, and it's pretty fascinating, and there's a lot of connecting terms. They use terms like consensus and decentralized and community and voting, and I just saw a lot of connections, and I'm very curious. So she's introducing me and us today to Graham Boyd. Graham is part of FairShares Common, and he started his career years ago in theoretical particle physics. And he has quite a story that's taking him across the years and developed his passion for sociocracy, which he's been working in for about 10 years. I think I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, Graham. So can you tell us about yourself?
Gladly. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for inviting me onto this podcast. And thank you very much, Jess, for connecting Elizabeth and myself. Very much appreciated. So my first love was particle physics, theoretical particle physics. And I spent about 10 years deep in the physics community, programming supercomputers, the Cray XPs back in those days. And what we were doing needed more speed than even the fastest supercomputers of that era could deliver. So I was, from the beginning, fairly deep into Unix, and to the best extent that I could, diving even into assembly language programming. That's where now 35 years ago, we're talking about, where I first came into contact with the concept of free software and the extension of freedom into areas that previously I'd not really thought of it. And freedom has always been something that's been really important to me, in that I grew up in apartheid South Africa, a context that was far from free for anybody who lived in it. So from a very young age, I was very sensitive to freedom, the harm that a lack of freedom causes to everybody who is in a context that is not free. And so as I moved into physics, came into free software, the whole copyleft movement, all of this just stayed with me. I went through an intermediate phase where there weren't the jobs in physics, and I was getting bored becoming the world's single specialist in such a narrowly defined field that there was almost nobody else to talk to. So I moved to Procter & Gamble, and I worked as a manager in Procter & Gamble for 10 years, half of it in Brussels, in Belgium, and the other half of it in China, in Beijing. And it was during that period that the oil price hit $150 a barrel. It became really obvious during the early to mid 2000s that climate change, the limits to growth that I'd been reading about when I was a physics student and had expected would only start happening after I was dead, that these things were happening now. And I was barely halfway through my life. And that was the point in the mid 2000s where I started asking myself questions, basically the kind of questions that used to drive my parents mad when I was a child, the kind of questions where you don't stop asking why, regardless of what answer you get. That sequential why process that the Japanese car industry has used to great effect to build cars that are inherently reliable by design. And I was asking myself, why is it that despite the fact that P&G, for example, is in essence a for-purpose company, its declared purpose for a long time, and still is, to improve the lives of the world's consumers, why is it that despite social enterprise, impact investment, corporate social responsibility, ESG, whatever, the B Corps, why is it that we're making so little progress towards having a world that really works for everybody and all life on it? And I kept asking the question, why? And it took me a while to get to the answer. One of the early answers I came to was, well, I'm not mature enough. And most of us are not mature enough. We're still reacting to things using the same ways of reacting that we picked up when we were children. And so my first thinking was, well, I need to change myself. I need to become wiser and more mature. And I still believe that that's true, that each of us will benefit by working on ourselves. And I've learned over the past couple of decades, that's not enough. One of the reasons why that was my starting point is that I also have had periods of depression in my life. So working on myself is a natural thing for me to do. It is my go-to place wherever I'm stressed is, okay, I need to work on myself. So if I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I start by working on myself. I start by thinking, maybe I'm not good enough and it's me. What I've learned is, well, yes, that may be part of what's happening, but it's not the whole story. The other things that I realized was we never learn at school, at university, or in kindergarten how to actually have conflict with other people in ways that are productive, in ways that generate better solutions, generate ways of improving ourselves. You know, most of us still interact with each other the way we learned in pre-kindergarten, which is either run away, hide away, or smack the other person.
Whoops.
Yeah, which doesn't quite work if you are, say, a 35-year-old founder of a startup or a 65-year-old CEO of a multinational. Smacking the fellow board member that is behaving in ways that you interpret as annoying doesn't help. Nor does running away and hiding, nor does anything else. So I put a lot of effort into figuring out how can we interact with each other in ways that are more effective. And again, that isn't enough. You know, it's not enough to be able to harness the conflict inside me, developing myself, not enough to harness the conflict between us and use that to increase the integrity and strength of our relationship and how we can collaborate. The next thing that I realized was that we need to change the way that we organize our work. The vertical power over hierarchy is simply dysfunctional for most of what we need to do in today's world. It's especially dysfunctional in the knowledge worker world. And a number of new approaches have emerged in that space, including processes like sociocracy or of one of its forks, which is holacracy. These give people far more space to decide autonomously what is the right thing for them to do for the needs that lie right in front of them. And to do that without needing to go up the hierarchy to any manager and ask permission. So I got deep into sociocracy and holacracy and all of this stuff. And lo and behold, it failed to work for me.
Oh, no.
And I realized, okay, there are two reasons why this is failing to work. You know, it's absolutely wonderful, sociocracy, for anybody who's done Scrum or reliability engineering or any of these things. Sociocracy is, in essence, coming from the same spirit, but applied to social communities of people that are working together to deliver results that are bigger than any one person can deliver. And that's why I really loved it when I first saw it. I thought, this is reliability engineering, except for people. And so it's not engineering, it's social.
Mhm.
But as I say, it did work. And I realized there are two reasons why it doesn't work. The first reason why it didn't work is because we weren't mature enough. So we needed to work on ourselves. And we weren't mature enough in how we interacted with each other. So we needed to change how we interacted. Work on these, sort of this combination along with sociocracy, and this end covers the gaps that sociocracy has downwards, and sociocracy covers the gaps that how we talk to each other as human beings have when we're actually trying to deliver results together. However, there's another gap upwards that sociocracy also cannot tackle. And this, you'll see in a moment, links very strongly into blockchain, decentralized autonomous organizations, and all of that stuff. So I appreciate your patience in bearing with me up until now.
It's been inspiring to listen to your story and your passion. And I would like to step back just a little bit, though, because sometimes the big picture is a little daunting to people who've never heard. And I would like to ask Jess to explain to us a little bit in very simple terms what sociocracy is before we go further into solutions.
Oh, well, I appreciate that you would ask me, but I mean, really, Graham, I've only been experienced sociocracy for the last year. And I have loved it. As Graham said, it's a tool for being able to help us, achieve things in a much more just better way, where it feels like all of us are being asked our opinion. We have the ability to contribute, all of us, to the project. But when I met Graham and understood what FairShares Commons was, and I think that he'll go there next, I understand where sociocracy could fail in a long term, because right now I happen to be working with sociocratic people and everybody's on board, and it's, everyone is in this modality of sociocracy. And so I've been enjoying it from that perspective. But then there is this other component, which I'll let Graham, can you tell us what sociocracy is, and then a solution that you've created to take care of that, which is the cool part of this conversation? Check.
Yes, I can gladly do that. So I'll say very simply what sociocracy is. We could easily spend days going into detail about what it is. But in essence, sociocracy is about a couple of things. A core element of sociocracy is the middle road between consensus, where we only do it if everybody says yes, and power dominance, where whoever has the biggest stick, we do it their way. Mm-hmm. Sociocracy does everything based on consent, the middle path. And the essence of consent is we do what everybody can at least live with, can at least tolerate. You may not agree with it, but you can tolerate it. This means that organizations running with sociocracy win over most other organizations in two ways. Number one, you bring in as much information as is available to any decision, regardless of whether the information is coming from the person with the big stick or the youngest, junior-most person who's just joined the organization and hasn't even been given a stick yet. You bring that information together, and you can then take a decision that takes into account all of the information and all of the concerns. However, if you try to do that with consensus, where you don't move forwards until everybody is saying, yes, I fully agree, organizations that run on consensus move very slowly. And if you have more than about 18, 19 people, can often end up blocked, unable to move, because there is somebody somewhere that it perhaps has a perfectionist tendency and just wants to spend another month polishing what you're going to decide. With consent, once you get to a point where everybody says, yeah, I can live with it, if we try it out and we learn that it's not exactly what we need, the worst that can happen is something that I can live with. It's not going to kill us. It's safe enough for now and good enough to try. So that's a core part of sociocracy. And the other core thing I would say in sociocracy is, because of this consent decision-making process where you integrate relevant concerns and objections, it's relatively easy and safe to have decision authority at the front line. Whoever is the closest to doing the work and to the information has the decision authority. You do not need to go up and down a hierarchy to get decisions done. Yeah. And especially once sociocracy is running really well, you don't worry about making mistakes, because within sociocracy is the idea of, well, if you make a mistake, in other words, if an experiment doesn't work out the way you planned, this is just data. This is just stuff to learn from. And you have the accountability and the authority to learn and to repair any harm that what you've done has caused. Yeah. And that just makes sociocracy something that combines the power and speed of moving individually with the endurance and stamina of moving together.
That is so exciting. There's so many parts of that that I could respond to, but one of the ones that I like the best right now is that it fosters innovation. When we remove the fear of failure, we open up the world to so many more possibilities, so much more creative input from people, like you said, on the front line who might actually have the answers, right?
Yes.
So I think that that is an incredible thing. The other thought that I had was when you talked about the person with the big stick. You know, sometimes we all have to eventually, when the person with the big stick makes that decision for us, we all have to, in our minds, come to that place where we're okay with it, right? So that we can live and move on. But it's kind of backwards when we have to convince ourselves retroactively without any input to the decision. I think we'll be happier people if we have that input and if we're part of the process of making that decision, even if it's the same decision in the end that we might have opposed. So I see many, many good things about the sociocratic governance model, but what is the downside?
Can I give can I interject really quick? Because I just want to say one beautiful thing that I love about the sociocracy is the difference between someone with the big stick. When the person has the big stick, they don't even ask your opinion sometimes. And so even in sociocracy, if you have no opinion, you still get asked, do you have anything to add? And so you, at least in the teams and the projects I've been on, even if I have nothing to add, I feel like I've been asked. And so that's such a beautiful, feeling moving forward in a project, to feel like I had the opportunity to contribute, and had I spoken up, they would have listened to me. And that alone is just a really great feeling when working in a project.
Sure, because that gives you ownership in the project, right? And when we have ownership in any project, we're going to perform better. We're going to make it better. We're going to have some responsibility there.
And we feel inspired to show up. That's the fun part. It's inspiring to know you're going to be listened to. It's like, oh, we have another meeting. Awesome. I know I'm going to be, at least be able to have input.
That's right. But there are downsides from what Graham has said to us. What have you seen is detraction to this?
Yes, there are a couple of downsides, and there are a couple of downsides that kick in not when sociocracy is running smoothly, but on the journey to sociocracy. Before I go into downsides, though, I want to pick up on the big stick. So in a normal company, the way we said it is the way it happens. So it is a person who is carrying the big stick. In sociocracy, the stick is not attached to the person. it's attached to the function or the role.
Mm.
Anybody could be in a role that carries the biggest stick at that particular instant. And so, unlike in a normal hierarchy where, let's say, the CEO is a person and that person is always carrying the CEO stick, in sociocracy, whatever is the role that has the best capacity to bring in wisdom, knowledge, and the appropriate decision is the role that has the big stick in that meeting. And a superb story of this, one of the first companies to run, not with whole sociocracy as it's usually regarded, but with something, let's say, as a precursor and quite close to it, was surprisingly enough the global behemoth in the financial services industry, the Visa Corporation.
Yeah.
During the very first years of the Visa Corporation, Dee Hock, who was the founder and first CEO, ran the company according to what's known as chaotic organization design. Part of his first way of running Visa was there were no job titles. And he tells the story of how on the very first evening, as they were about to send out the mail shot with the very first Visa credit cards ever issued, they ran into problems that the equipment they were using did not match together. They could not feed from the equipment that was producing the letters, the letter chain, into the machine that was folding them and putting them into envelopes. And so Dee, the CEO of the company, said, right, who understands what's happening here? And the woman who ran their mail sorting system in the basement said, hey, I think I've got an idea. I think I understand what we can do here. And Dee said, right, you're now the boss of the company. You tell me what I need to do. And she said, right, Dee, we need 10 broom handles. 10 broom handles? Where do I find 10 broom handles? I don't care. That's your responsibility to find out. Go and do it.
That's great.
And, you know, she'd never been trained in how to manage other people, let alone somebody who was creating this company out of nothing. And yet, as soon as her expertise was recognized by everybody, and she needed, because of the context they were in, to lead, she was quite capable of leading everybody, including the person who in a normal company would be wearing the badge of founder and CEO. It was easier because nobody in Visa in the early years had a title. So that illustrates more advantages, and it steps into one of the big disadvantages. Remember, I was talking with these 4 fingers, and we'll come to the 4th finger in a moment. Who am I inside myself, and how do we interact with each other? We all go through a stage where we derive our self-identity, our sense of worth, we meet our needs for belonging, for recognition through our work. And having a title at work, a title that other people respect, that has some level of power with it, is an essential part of our growing up as adults. At the moment, most people expect to get that from their company, from the hierarchy of the organization. And this is one of the biggest challenges for people who start working in a sociocracy. If they are used to working in a vertical hierarchy where they have derived their self-identity, their self-worth through the title, through the job that they have, it can, for some people, be a very disconcerting period, the transition to sociocracy, because they say, well, who am I? If I don't have this title to put on my business card, then where do I get it from? Now, usually that is a question that is so deep in the subconscious that we're not actually aware that we're asking it. And so that question then shows up in all kinds of other objections and barriers to using sociocracy effectively. The other potential downside of sociocracy is if I wake up in my apartment to discover that the building is on fire, that's a point where you really need to move fast. And if everybody is starting to panic, you often need to have somebody who is simply an authority figure. That person embodies personal power and personal authority emanating from their ego. And so you sometimes have crises where you absolutely need somebody who embodies power and leadership. If that's the case, then if people are using sociocracy in, let me say, in an idealistic way, and they are rejecting all use of personal power to be 100% sociocratic, that's where you could have issues as well. However, as soon as you're any good at sociocracy, that problem disappears, because you very quickly realize, when is it that you need to act from personal power because it's a crisis? And you do so either because you have agreed within the sociocratic process in advance what happens when you're in a crisis and you need to use power over to do something quickly, or because you're so comfortable with how sociocracy enables you to take accountability for the consequences of your action, and everybody supports you in repairing any harm done, that you're able to say, right, I'm going to take this action because I believe we need it now, and I trust that the process will keep me and everybody else safe if we then need to repair any of the harm that's been caused afterwards.
So what you're saying now is just a little bit more advanced in application than what I've been exposed to studying sociocracy at this point. I was studying it in terms of decision-making or project management and things like this. You're talking about sociocracy in every aspect of your life, in the example of the apartment building being on fire. So is that an end goal of people who adhere to sociocracy, to have it in every aspect of our life and to give up that personal power?
I would hesitate to call it a goal of people who practice sociocracy. It is certainly something that many sociocracy practitioners already do or aspire to do. There are a number who run their family using elements of sociocracy. Just the fact that at the heart of sociocracy is consent, that nothing happens that you do not consent to, nothing happens that affects you unless you have consented to it. It means it makes it perfect to run a family.
Jess, I know you gave me an example of how you run your family. Can you give us one? I think examples take big concepts like this and break them down in the ways that people like me can understand it.
I mean, simple. When we first moved to Puerto Rico, it was like just deciding what sites we wanted to go see. And then once we had made that decision, when my daughter got tired, where before she might complain, I don't want to. And then my son saying, but we said we were going to go. It was like, okay, do you have a proposal, Maggie? What's your proposal? Go ahead, make a proposal. And it's this empowering thing to say, I'm listening to you. Tell me what your idea is, Maggie. And then we'll go around the family and everyone will have their opportunity to give their input on what they think about your proposal. And then if we have any objections and it's a beautiful, when making a proposition or proposal to the kids, to be able to say, well, is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? And they're like, yeah, I can live with that. And that's literally the attitude. And so it allows us to just make decisions as a family easier. And it's really reduced the amount of just cross-talking. We're taking the time where each person has the opportunity to go around and share their opinions. So, and I was just raising my hand going, I'm one of those people when he said sociocratic practitioners. And I think it just becomes something that I enjoy having it. I enjoy feeling included in conversations, and I feel empowered by knowing that I am including people in conversations. So I think it overtakes us in that there's so much enjoyment in that style of communication, at least for me. It's taken over every aspect of my life, and I'm trying to convert all my friends, and that's why I called you, Elizabeth. You're a really smart lady in the blockchain world. You need to know this stuff.
Well, it sounds to me like when we start applying it and practicing, it becomes part of our essence, right? And we don't think about it maybe as much. So, but it was a question I had when you gave that example, because I have spent a large part of my life trying to reclaim that personal power, you know, as a woman growing up in the era that I did, with some of the setbacks that I've had in my life. You know, you spend a lot of time during that self-help process, Graham, that you mentioned, is reclaiming that power. And so now all of a sudden I'm just feeling this little bit of it's not a conflict, but it's a little bit of inner dissonance about, ooh, give up that power. But it sounds to me like when you use the word consent, that actually that's where the power lies, that I have power in the fact that I am consenting to this. Is that fair to say?
I would say that's very fair to say. In fact, I would add to what you're saying in that sociocracy is not about giving up power.
Okay.
Sociocracy is about distinguishing between healthy power and toxic power, retaining healthy power and giving up toxic power. And so actually for people who are on an inner journey to either reclaim their use of healthy power or to reclaim their use of healthy love, because you need both love and power to be equally strong. Anybody who hasn't read it, I strongly recommend reading the book by Adam Kahane, Power and Love, about how those are two legs that need to be equally strong in order to really work together on some big endeavor. So sociocracy, in terms of how we work together, is actually a powerful enabler for people to develop both of these legs equally strongly. And especially if you integrate it with, for example, our Evolute 6 adaptive way for interactions between people and within ourselves, that triad of all three levels, how we use sociocracy around tasks or work kind of decisions, how we interact with each other as meaning-making human beings, and how we mediate the voices inside our heads saying, yes, no, do, you can't. If we integrate all of those, and we, you know, down here are things like, inside our adaptive way, things like nonviolent communication, Keegan's immunity to change, transformational thinking, a whole bunch of stuff. And again, all of that helps us to recognize how are we, through the scripts that run us, complicit with creating the reality we experience. How is the lens that we're using to look at situations where power is emerging, how is that lens shaping our experience of power and what we then see as the limited set of options we can use to react with? And the more we can consciously work with the lenses, maps, and stories that run us, and in our interaction with people, and in the choices that we believe we have to choose from, the more we can see a broader range of choices, the more that we can make those choices sometimes despite our fears and feelings, the more possibility we have of experimenting with new ways of behaving and new ways of being in the world, so that we can show up with healthy power and healthy love in all aspects of our life, whether it's at work or outside work.
Okay. You know, I came into this conversation with you today thinking, that I'm coming in as the crypto woman and we're going to get to blockchain. But maybe a lot of people know or don't know that one of my other fascinations is neurolinguistics. It probably would have been a career path I would have taken had I been more informed. So the idea that our words and those lenses, they frame us, they frame who we become, who we are, and our decisions. It's very powerful. So I really, really appreciate the link that you made to that, because it sounds to me like this is something so fundamental and so foundational that when we actually get to the place where we start adding technology on top of it and showing or demonstrating perhaps how our technology can facilitate something so fundamental, I think it's going to be amazing. And it seems to me, Graham, that you are the person to tell us. I mean, your background from both directions seems to collide right there. And maybe you can take us into that part of it.
Yes, I will gladly do that. If we look at how many of us answer the question, what do you do? Many of us answer that question by beginning with, I am, insert job title here.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you're starting a sentence with I am, especially if that's how you're actually thinking, if you're thinking I am this label and you're trying to live up to that label, then you've internalized all of the stories and scripts about what that label means. So if you're saying something like, I am an employee, I am a manager, I am a coder, I am an investor, I am a shareholder, whatever, you're limiting yourself. Especially if you're going into things where you say, I am angry or I am depressed.
Mm-hmm.
Again, no, you are not angry, you have anger. And as soon as you shift your language to say, I have anger, I have depression, rather than I am angry, I am depressed, it opens space for more. Now, I've been pointing at my top finger here for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody says, I am an investor, and somebody else says, I am a member of staff, what that then brings with it is property law or concepts of property and power. In many companies, even if you are running on sociocracy and you have deployed the adaptive way and developmental methods consistently throughout the company, the investors in most companies still carry all of the voting rights in the company. So any decision that needs to be taken at general meeting level, the investors carry the stick as human beings, not as a role, but as the human being. And secondly, the investors get all of the wealth generated apart from what is used to run the business and pay salaries and so on. They get all of the rise in market value of the company, and they get all of the dividends that are shared out apart from anything paid out as bonuses, etc., to the staff. And whilst that does not, or let's say, whilst property law is not directly applicable to companies, and I can say a lot more about that separately, the way that we incorporate leads investors to have power over all of the other stakeholders in the company and the company as a whole. And about 10 years ago, you remember I came out of South Africa, apartheid, all of these things. About 10 years ago, it struck me that there's a parallel between, on the one hand, apartheid and slavery, and on the other hand, how we incorporate. And it's deep inside what's visible in what I've just said, lack of freedom. As soon as property concepts are being applied, whether explicitly or implicitly, freedom no longer exists, and you automatically have consequences that are harmful. So if you think of apartheid South Africa, if you happen to be born with a white skin, you had all of the power to govern the country and the lion's share of the wealth generated. That sounds to me kind of the same as if you happen to have money to invest, you have all of the power to govern the company and the lion's share of the wealth generated, both through appreciation of the company value and the dividends. Mm-hmm. Equally, if you compare this with slavery, well, legally, there's the concept of a legal person. And there are two types of legal persons. There are human legal persons, the three of us in this call and all of you watching and listening to the podcast, and non-human legal persons. For example, incorporated companies, or in New Zealand, some of the mountains and rivers that have been declared full persons. As soon as you apply the concept of property to a person, you satisfy the International Criminal Court's definition of enslavement. So, by analogy to the ICC definition of enslavement for persons, and typically only applied to human persons, we can ask ourselves, and this is what I was asking 10 years ago when I kept asking why. We can ask ourselves, what happens if we treat the non-human legal person as if it were property? And it struck me, well, what that means is I can buy and sell the company. Now, especially in today's world, with a company that is based on knowledge work, that is the bedrock of a knowledge economy, the only value that a company has are its people. So buying and selling the company is de facto buying and selling the people. And at some level, everybody in every company knows this. Deep inside, wow, they know that they are subject to the decisions, the whims, perhaps the capriciousness of the shareholders, the dominant shareholders who have sufficient voting rights to, in essence, be able to buy or sell the company. So if you're in this situation where you perhaps only at an instinctive, intuitive level know that you are embedded inside a power over hierarchy, you're not going to go the extra mile. You're not going to be fully engaged. And we see this in the statistics. Only the Gallup polls on employee engagement are showing consistently that globally, on average, only 13% of employees are fully engaged. 23% are actively disengaged, and the rest are surviving, doing what's necessary to maintain their job. Yeah. Equally, in the startup world, how many startups are failing because of the pressure to scale, to grow, to become unicorns, which is driven by looking at the startup as if it were ownable property, rather than looking at the startup the way I look at them, as a living being that happens to be made up of a collection of living human beings, and where for this collection of living human beings to really be able to do what it's being asked to do, the whole needs to have as much freedom as each individual human being.
Wow.
And that if you really buy into the power of freedom to make things happen, for me, this is an obvious consequence. And from my perspective, if we look back over thousands of years of history, every time that we have emancipated any category of individual human being, however we categorize them through history, we have opened up the power that we need to solve the problems that we are facing. And with the climate crisis here, with all of the other crises that humanity is moving into, I'm convinced that in 50 years' time, we'll look back and realize that the step that we needed to take now to unleash the power we need to solve these crises is the very step of emancipating the legal person, collections of human beings that are collaborating together to achieve outcomes that are planet scale, way bigger than any of us can do by ourselves. And that's what led me to realize we needed this fourth finger to complement the other three, which is a company structure that is inherently a free legal person. In other words, a commons, a functional commons. I want to put in one more hook, and then I'll pause for a moment. That isn't enough to just have a company that is free. We also need to make sure that the company shares fairly. And this is something that Professor Rory Ridley Duff brought in. And in partnership, we've merged our thinking into what's called the FairShares Commons, which is an integration of everybody has a fair share of the wealth generated, everybody has a fair share of the governance, and everything is put together in such a balance of powers that the company functions already under existing company law as if the legal person was legally declared to be free, making it a relatively easy step in some countries to fine-tune company law such that the company truly is free and needs to be seen as free rather than as property.
So I really, really appreciated the foundational level that you've laid for us to show us where the problems lie, to show us how we might be able to bring a model of governance and decision-making and interacting with each other to actually make us more human. And when I say more human, I like to think of it not only as free, but free to create, free to innovate, free to contribute, free to make the world function maybe the way it was intended to function, which is a lot better than it is right now.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the word I often use is once somebody is fully free, they are free to take accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want our companies to take accountability, to be truly for purpose, they need to be free. Otherwise, they cannot take accountability. The ownership concepts will at some point prevent them from really taking accountability, because what they would need to do to take accountability clashes with the interests of the owning stakeholder group.
But once you give somebody a voice and permission to use that voice, you're in essence saying, giving them a responsibility without them knowing it. Because
Yes.
when they open their mouth to speak or click a button to vote or raise a hand to consent, they are in effect taking responsibility.
Yes, exactly. I'd like to put in something else. I know you said paring it down, and I do have the tendency to keep adding more layers of paint to what I'm doing.
Well, you're painting a beautiful picture of understanding. I'm actually pretty thrilled for how this is going. So keep painting.
Right. Thank you. And I'll put in a little plug. So anybody who wants to understand more than can be put into this podcast, my co-author, Jack Reardon, who's an economics professor, and myself, we're busy writing a book that spans everything we're talking about. It's called Picasso and Einstein, The Economy, Leadership, and You. And our commitment is that the ebook will always be available to download on a pay what you think it's worth basis. And so right now you can quite happily download the draft underway and dive into that. And if you're feeling particularly generous, head over to our crowdfunding page and send some money our way so that we can accelerate finishing the book.
What I want to do for you is see if we can't put that ebook on our digital marketplace on the blockchain.
Yes, yes.
We will do that when you were ready. Anyway, I interrupted you. Keep going.
Yes. So what I wanted to say was, where Jack and I end in the book is talking about the economy of the free as a global economy that is fundamentally reinvented versus what we have today, that can truly have the power to address the large-scale challenges we're facing, like the climate crisis, but also like the emerge of the next phase of all swathes of technology, artificial intelligence, augmented creativity, blockchain, et cetera, in that if you have an economy of companies that are all FairShares commons, where in each company, all of the stakeholders have governance rights and a share of the wealth generated, and in the commons as a whole, all of the companies have an interlocking relationship with each other of mutual interdependence. Mm-hmm. Not dependence, not independence, but interdependence. You then have exactly the scaffolding you need to address most, if not all, of the major challenges we're facing. You inherently have a way within the business economy to run something like unconditional basic income. You can get rid of most need for taxation. So you have a very light state, because all of the citizens are directly stakeholders in any of the businesses that they are touched by sufficiently, and they get a share of the wealth generated. So you simultaneously have what libertarianism wants, which is a very, very light state, and what socialism wants, which is care for the whole. So the heart of this is that it integrates opposites. Now let's think about artificial intelligence, augmented creativity, all of these trends that are on the edge of happening. If that happens with companies that are all FairShares Commons incorporated as an ecosystem of FairShares Commons companies, it no longer matters which company you work for, because the hard boundary between inside and outside a company has become porous. It no longer matters if the work that you're currently doing disappears, because within the FairShares Commons ecosystem, you're a stakeholder of the decisions that affect you. You're involved in a decision that leads to your job disappearing, and you will get from this ecosystem of companies the support that you need to retrain. Because all four of these layers are in there, that support includes how do you reinvent yourself from the inside out. If you used to think of yourself as, I'm a smith that puts metal shoes onto cart horses, and you now need to redefine yourself as an assembly language coder. Well, you have the support you need to redefine your identity from I am a smith that has value because I work with hot fires and red steel into I have value because I slave over a bank of hot valves entering into a hex keypad assembly language. Yeah. So you have the support internally, you have the support in how we interact. The way that our companies are organized makes them highly agile. You can change your company from the world's largest manufacturer of wagon wheels into the world's largest manufacturer of mainframe computers. You can do that. And because your customers, your suppliers, the cities you're embedded in, everybody is a stakeholder in the success. When these big trends come in, it becomes much easier to react in a healthy way to the changes that are coming. So I see the FairShares Commons, and especially ecosystems of companies using the FairShares Commons, as bringing in the kind of anti-fragility being way beyond resilient or robust, in that for people who haven't read Dalim Tassev's work, it means that the capacity to really rebuild yourself when you're under stress, rather than simply cope with stress. So this brings in the kind of global scale systemic anti-fragility that we need to deal with the climate crisis and all of the other crises that are imposed on us, and the crises that could come our way because of the rapid transformation of our entire economy into an economy that is more and more generating wealth on the basis of different types of tech.
It does seem like we are on the verge of a lot of paradigms and we don't even know it. Well, or we don't acknowledge it. And that this actual way of thinking is a paradigm in itself that could offer an approach. It won't be a solution, but it might give us an approach where we can come up with the solutions.
Yesterday when we were chatting, Graham, you said something I think that I heard, and you said that blockchain enabled or distributed ledger technology really allowed for the vision of FairShares Commons to flourish because of the voting and the scale and the distribution of the FairShares and all of that. So if that's accurate, I think that that's definitely a powerful thing to include in as we're about to go get all techie.
One of the things we touched on was the relationship between the FairShares Commons and blockchain in general. There are a couple of areas where the two are just made for each other. So first of all, the FairShares Commons, because it includes all stakeholders in the governance process, at least all stakeholders that qualify, from consumers, suppliers, et cetera, for a large multinational, that could very easily mean that you now have 1 billion people with voting rights in a general meeting. Now, quite probably not all billion are going to turn up and vote, certainly not if they have to turn up physically in one place. Even if you're turning up virtually, you won't get all of them there, but you're still going to get significantly more than can be easily handled by current general meeting voting processes. So having a way of people engaging with the company, expressing their vote using something like a blockchain, and I use blockchain as a generic placeholder for whatever specific it may be. You know, it could be something like Arthur Brock's holochain or any of the other things that are being developed in this direction. By bringing in this technology, you can now scale the governance process of a company's general meeting up to a huge number of people spread around the world who could never physically come together again. equally, you can put in there a whole slew of smart contracts that make it automatic whether somebody has achieved the qualifying criteria to vote in one or the other stakeholder group. Again, making the automating work that has to be automated for the FairShares Commons to scale beyond a handful of employees and stakeholders. The other area where all of this is vital, an essence of the FairShares Commons is that it puts onto an equitable footing all kinds of capital and therefore needs all kinds of currencies, one currency per capital. You need to have time currencies, currencies like the Terra, various other complementary currencies that are fundamentally different to the positive interest bank debt that we base money on. And again, the whole blockchain is exactly what we need to run an ecosystem of FairShares Commons using, I don't know, let's say the 6 basic different capitals that are in the integrated reporting initiative and things like that, and perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 different currencies for each capital. If you try to do that without blockchain technology, you're looking at a very expensive, very onerous task. Mm-hmm. And again, I'll emphasize when I use the word blockchain, I'm using that as a placeholder for whatever is the most appropriate, specific for that task. Mm-hmm. The other thing where there's a strong intersection between FairShares Commons and the whole blockchain is that in how you actually incorporate and operate. So there are question marks at the moment in the minds of some of our global and national institutions around how would a decentralized autonomous organization function legally, because by definition it isn't anywhere. Right. Now, the underlying ethos of a DAO and the underlying ethos of a FairShares Commons company are quite close together. So I can easily see establishing a company legally in one country as a FairShares Commons. So from company law, it looks like a normal company, and yet it's actually operating as a distributed autonomous organization where the different stakeholder categories and how votes and decisions are taken maps into how the DAO operates, so that for a member of the DAO, it looks like a DAO, and for the national company law power holders, it looks like a company in such a way that it enables the two communities to connect. Mm-hmm. So that's another area where I can see a connection, potential synergies, especially what this now opens up space for. And this is where we're heading with our incubator and where I intend to get to with the incubator and investment fund that we're starting up, is that if you have one single umbrella FairShares Commons company that runs the entire ecosystem, within that, you do not need to physically incorporate any of the member companies of the ecosystem. They can all operate as virtual companies on the blockchain, virtual FairShares companies. And at that point, I believe that we have very, very high, if not complete overlap between where the decentralized autonomous organization is heading and where the FairShares Commons is heading. And that's something that I get really excited about. The idea that we might just have a few companies that truly function as a commons, that are held in stewardship for the benefit of all of the stakeholders who are involved. All of the stakeholders act as stewards caring for the health of the commons as a whole for everybody, benefiting from the wealth generated. And when I say all of the stakeholders, I explicitly include the entire planet, nature, everything. This is not just necessarily human stakeholders. And if we have a few of these that are properly run as FairShares commons and everything else happens virtually within it, then I think that we will have exactly the kind of power and accountability and community care that we need to address the climate crisis, all of the other challenges that we have, and reinvent the world in such a way that we can all thrive on it.
Graham, it excites me too. And I think that it's going to excite a lot of other people that listen to this. I know that many of the people in the crypto blockchain space who get the bug of using the blockchain technology for making the world a better place are going to resonate with this idea. And right now, my mind is spinning like, what kind of company can I build first on this? I would love to have a further conversation with you and actually demonstrate to you some of the technology that we have that is ready to solve your problems. Can we do that next week?
Yes, I would absolutely love to do that next week.
Okay.
And the short answer to your question is, you can build any company you want this way.
I just have to pick one, don't I? That's the problem. I have so many ideas.
I do like that when you dig deeper into what I've learned from Graham. When you start a FairShares Commons type of organization, it works well if a founder comes in, but doesn't necessarily need to stay around, because you're building something that's sustainable without the one person. So build as many as you want, Elizabeth. Just start with your first one, and then move
true
on to the next
confession
one.
about me is that I love to start things. I love to help people start things, but then I have a need to go on to the next thing, right? So this is perfect. I'll go in and I'll start. You too, Graham. I thrive on starting things. So this is great, Graham. I wish you the best success in all of the projects that you just outlined that you're involved in. And if I or Jess can do anything to facilitate you, I'm speaking on behalf of Jess because I know she's on board with this. Let us help. Let us help you in any way. And it was really nice to meet you.
And absolutely wonderful to meet you as well, Elizabeth. And I really look forward to our next conversation.
So there's a lot that resonated with me in our conversation today, and I look forward to next week